And that brings me to this, the elephant in the room. AI policy for this class. First of all, AI is a valid tool. It is very useful. Real programmers use AI all the time, including me. It's a really great shortcut, but there are risks and limitations to it. And I want you to think about what you want out of this class. Okay? I want you to think about what you want to learn. Because while AI can provide you the answers to every single one of the problems in this class, you're going to leave this class not knowing anything. And in the end, I see my job as making sure that I think you understand the thing that I'm trying to teach you in each module. Okay? So while I'm not going to be the AI police, and absolutely, definitely, there have been students in this class who have cheated their way through using AI and not gotten caught. If I think that you posted something for an assignment that you don't understand, then I'm not going to give you an F and accuse you of anything. If I think that you are posting code that you didn't write or you didn't understand or is way beyond the scope of an assignment, I'll say, hey, can you walk me through this? Can you tell me what's going on there? And if you can explain how that code works, then that will satisfy me that you understand what it is you're doing. And I'm not going to push it any further. I don't believe in the use of AI detection tools. First of all, they don't work. More often than not, they accuse people falsely of using AI when it isn't real. By the way, the odds of that are like triple if you're an English language learner or if you are multilingual. And so they're severely biased against a lot of people, and they just don't work. So I'm not going to use those. I don't care that much. And what it really comes down to is what you want out of this class and why you're here. Can anyone tell me the difference between these two things?
One's really jumbled up and one's just lines.
One's really jumbled up and one's just lines. That's a good observation.
One's organized and the other is like chaotic.
Organized versus chaos. I like it. Yeah. Okay. So you're saying this one has a solution to get to the other side. This is a maze. There's only one entrance. You're right. Yeah. You have an observation? One is a lot more efficient. Which one is more efficient? I want you to think about what we mean by efficiency, right? If I was to find the solution through this maze, and I haven't actually taken the time to work it out, so I'm going to go with not that way. Okay, so there's the solution, something like that, right? If I was to measure the distance, let's say I had to walk this maze, the distance I have to walk here versus the distance I have to walk here. Which one would take me longer to walk, assuming that I walk the same speed and I make all of the right choices here? The one on the left? Okay, so let's measure the distance here. Okay, so this has one single path. You have to walk, every white line in this is a part of the path that you have to walk. In this case, shorter, right? So the difference between these two things, they actually are different things entirely. The thing on the left is a maze. We're pretty familiar with a maze. The thing on the right is a word that's often confused with a maze, but it's not actually a maze. It's called a labyrinth. You heard that term? Anybody seen the wonderful Jim Henson, David Bowie movie, The Labyrinth? Classic. Uh, that movie actually mischaracterizes a labyrinth with a maze. But labyrinth sounds way cooler than maze, right? So a labyrinth has a different purpose entirely than a maze. And in the real world, a labyrinth might look like this. This is a labyrinth that we just visited up in Northern California, up in Eureka, which is about 2 hours from the Oregon border. This labyrinth is a double spiral pattern, and that's my wife standing in the middle for scale. This labyrinth is actually a single path that is a half a mile long. And the path starts here, and you walk around, and you actually, when you come back around, you're not going to be on the next part of the spiral, you'll be one over, because this is actually the path back, and it ends somewhere behind, back over here. Can't see that part. So what's the difference? What's the difference? Why would we have this? Why do you suppose we would have a long, windy path that you walk on for a half a mile that essentially goes nowhere? Any thoughts? To keep you trapped. That's a good. You've been watching the Jim Henson, David Bowie Labyrinth movie, maybe. To keep you trapped. That's a good guess. What else? What else it might be for? Anybody familiar with the practice of meditation? What's that? It's yeah. So it gives you something to focus on that is at the same time it's sort of mindless, right? Because you just follow the path in and out of this thing. It's also mindful because it allows you to do something that's repetitive and focused. And it's actually one of the things that I like about swimming is that it's quiet and you spend most of your time following this black line at the bottom of the pool, back and forth, and it's very rhythmic and focused and has the same sort of purpose. But the purpose of a labyrinth, and you often find these on the floors of ancient churches because they've been used for spiritual practices like prayer and focus and that kind of meditation. So the purpose of a labyrinth versus a maze is that if you're successful in a maze, your job is to get out of the maze as quickly as possible, right? We all agree on that? Just get it done. The purpose of a labyrinth is not to just get it done. It's to be sort of focused in the moment, focused on your practice, focused on what you're doing. Because obviously, if the purpose was just to get to the center of this and then get down, you could just walk right up the side and then walk back down. But if you did that, would you have the right kind of experience? Would it be useful to you? Probably not, right? So here's the point. I'm going to land the plane now. We can do this class in multiple ways. But what I've built for you in this class is a labyrinth. I've built a series of things that I want you to do that might feel long or tedious, or you might look at it and say, man, there's an easy shortcut here. But what I want you to do is follow the path. And I want you to have the experience. I want you to focus on the process of learning in this class, because that's what's going to get you to a point where you're a great coder. And that's if I'm successful, all of you walk out of here and you're great at coding. Okay? So in terms of how you look at AI and how you use AI, it is useful. And what we often call vibe coding, which is writing code using AI, is a sort of interesting thing, because vibe coding feels like it's going to be a shortcut, but a lot of times it's the least efficient way and it teaches you nothing. Now, these two guys, you recognize these guys? Bill Gates on the left, the founder of Microsoft. Linus Torvalds on the right, the inventor of Linux, who pretty much wrote the equivalent of Windows by himself, right? Except it's better than Windows, arguably. These two guys are some of the oldest nerds in the business, right? Bill Gates is super wealthy. Linus Torvalds, not that wealthy because he mostly just did stuff for free. Wealthy enough. He does fine, I think. But here's a real conversation between the two of them in 2005 or 25. And Bill Gates says, what does vibe and vibe coding stand for? And Linus Torvalds says, very inefficient but entertaining. Meaning that it leads you on a lot of wild goose chases. Okay, here's a great illustration of a guy turning toward the longer way around, asking AI to please fix his code. And when understanding how things really work is a much shorter trip. Another one, this guy using AI, polite at first, and then angry when things don't work because he doesn't know how to fix them. Okay, much easier to code in vibe coding than to figure out what's wrong because you haven't figured out how to do things. So the moral of the story here is vibe coding is useful, but who is it useful for? I don't think it's useful for students who want to learn. Why? Because it doesn't teach you anything about coding. It just does the work for you and spits out an answer. It's like running straight to the middle of the labyrinth. Who is it useful for? It's useful for people who already know what they're doing. I sort of give it this analogy. If I took you out to the airport and I put you in the cockpit of a 747, now you've probably seen some movies where people are flying planes, right? Movies, TV shows, kind of recognize a steering wheel. If I want to make the plane go up, what do I do with the steering wheel? I pull it back, right? If I want to make the plane go faster, how do I make the plane go faster? Right? You're doing this in your mind. You're probably visualizing it. So you know what some of the dials and things on the plane mean. If I put you in the cockpit and I said, hey, I'm going to let you fly this plane, right? I give you no lessons, no instruction whatsoever. How many of you think you could make the plane move around? At least a little bit. You could probably make it move. You could get down the runway. How many of you think you could get a plane in the air? Maybe? Got some confident folks. Okay, so you're in the air in the 747, this massive flying hunk of metal. Your life is at stake, and the fuel is running low. It's time to land the plane. How many of you think you could land a 747? Yeah, you're a trained pilot? You think you could? You played a lot of Flight Simulator, though? No, just feel confident, huh? Yeah, exactly. It's going to hit the ground eventually, but safely is the key word here. So my point is, without expertise, you're kind of like a dude in a 747 who's up in the air. At some point, you're going to have that oh crap moment where you realize that you're in over your head. But guess what? It's really hard to back out of that situation. And my worst nightmare is that one of my students will get a job programming Python where they say, yeah, I aced Mr. Mosley's class at BC. And they start vibe coding their way through things at their job and have that moment in the middle of doing something important, right? I don't want that. I really want you to learn. And the only way to do that is to walk the labyrinth. Now, I am not opposed to AI use. And in fact, in one or two assignments in this class, I'm going to actually direct you to use AI. Not yet, later on, and in a very specific context. But in our Canvas shell, we also have this. You'll see it right on the homepage of Canvas. And by the way, I recommend that you use the web version of Canvas rather than the Canvas app. You'll see a lot more of the class that way, and it works a lot better. Canvas app's kind of garbage, actually. Don't tell Instructure I said that. But this is an AI powered teaching assistant that I created specifically for this class. It knows about every assignment, it knows how to do the coding, it knows all kinds of things about the class. You can ask it anything. But the best use of this is if you're struggling with some code, you can copy and paste the code into this chatbot. And you can say, here's the error I'm getting, or here's where I'm stuck. Can you help me out? Now, I have specifically programmed this chatbot to not give you the answer and not do the coding for you. So what it will do is it'll look at your code and it'll say, hey, where you said this, why do you think it's that way? Or what do you think you could change about this line of code? So it will walk you through how to improve your code. The best thing about it is that chatbots, unlike your professor, doesn't need to sleep, doesn't take breaks. It's always there for you 24/7. Use it as much as you want. So it will help you. It will help you learn, though. It won't just give you the answer.